Hello everyone, and welcome to The Body Shop's Great Youth Debate. Before we start today's proceedings, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and the elders past, present and emerging. Always was, always will be. I would also like to acknowledge any First Nations people that are present here today. I'm now going to hand over to The Body Shop's APAC Brand and Activism Director, Shannon Crisp, to tell you a little bit more about why we're here today.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Shannon. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm really glad to be here today. So aside from being known for change-making beauty products, The Body Shop's purpose is to fight for a fairer and more beautiful world. And we really see it as our mission to drive social change, to encourage activism, and to empower people. Did you know that half of the world's population, or almost half, is under 30, and yet they only make up 2.6% of the parliamentarians around the world? The average age of the world's leaders is 62. And of all of the parliaments in the world, 37% do not have a single MP under the age of 30. And less than 1% of those people are female. Young people have the right to be included in political decisions that affect them. However, there are a lot of barriers that prevent them from participation. And that's why we're here today, to host this debate amongst these really inspiring young people. A discussion between Australia's next generation of leaders from across the political spectrum. And this also marks the launch of our global activism campaign, Be Seen, Be Heard. And that's launched earlier this week, but here in Australia is the official launch. So recently, The Body Shop conducted a piece of global research called the Global Youth Survey. And this survey found that 8 in 10 Australians, and that's 80% for those of you who aren't good at maths, believe the current political system needs drastic reform. And that's in order to be fit for the future. And 79% of them feel neglected by the nation's politicians. So these insights are really echoed by the broader population, with about 70% of Australians agreeing that the age balance in politics is wrong. And so with that, I think there's a real need for more young people participating in this conversation. And with that said, now that I've set that scene, important scene, I'll turn it over to Yasmin and these really inspiring people. Thanks, and have a great morning.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Well, I'm so excited to be here today, moderating such an important discussion just days before many of us will have the chance to make our voices heard in the federal election. But activism doesn't stop with exercising your right to vote. Discussions like these are important tools to spark new conversations and drive meaningful change. So I'd like to introduce you to the incredible young leaders who have joined us today. Clark Cooley, Federal President of the Young Liberals, Ali Amin, National President of Young Labour, and Ethan Janjak, who is the Greens candidate for Mackellar. So asking the questions today, we have an inspiring group of activists who formed the Body Shop Youth Panel. Maria Thatil, youth activist and Miss Universe Australia, Anjali Sharma, climate activist, Anjali Ojanaka, Australian United Nations Youth Representative, Ashley Streeter-Jones, founder of Raise Our Voice Australia, Latoya Aroha Rule, educator and activist, Nicola Barker, co-founder and director of the National Indigenous Youth Education Coalition. So without further ado, let's start the discussion. First question I'm going to throw to all of you. What is your party doing for young people? Clark, I'll start with you.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And I want to also firstly pay my acknowledgement and respect to the traditional owners of the land upon where we're meeting today, the elders past, present, and of course in today's context, the emerging leaders. We need to do more to encourage Indigenous people into Parliament, and that starts with young people. It starts with the Young Liberals, Young Labour, and of course the Young Greens. We have made some progress, but we still have a lot to do in regards to that. This election is going to be a choice. It's going to be a choice between a government you know, a Prime Minister you know, and an opposition you don't, a Labor Greens opposition, a Labor Greens government. It's going to be a decision about who you want to run the economy. It's been a central issue in this campaign. It's the most important issue constantly when we talk to people at this election. The economy is important because it represents everything that we need to do in government. If you want to make effective action on education, on climate, on health, you need a strong economy to back that up. And our economy is strong. Right now, youth unemployment is at 8.3%. Under the previous Labor Greens government, it was 13.4%. Now, that's tens of thousands of young Australians who have the opportunity today to make a contribution that they didn't have under the previous government. Now, there are a lot of economic statistics, but it's I think it's 7:40 in the morning, so I can't rail them all off. But some big ones there. AAA credit rating, one of only 9 countries in the world which has a AAA credit rating. We've got a fastest growing economy of all G7 nations. And of course, we've got that very low unemployment rate of 4%. But what's important about that is also women's participation. It's the highest level ever. Women have never been more engaged in our economy than they are today, and that's a fantastic thing. The Treasury and the Reserve Bank have both confirmed that is actually projecting even better, so we will see even better outcomes in the future. But why does this all matter? Well, it matters because, as I said, the economy is the central thing in everything we need to do in government. If you want to take effective action on climate change, you need that strong economy. We need a strong economy so we can pay for our renewable energy transformation. Projects like Snowy Hydro 2.0, which it's going to be the largest pumped hydro scheme in the Southern Hemisphere. Projects like the Battery of the Nation and the Marinus Link in Tasmania and Victoria, where we've got a surplus of renewable energies in that state, which can power Victoria's coal-fired power stations and make those things something of the past in the future. We've also got...
We'll probably have to wrap it up soon.
One more thing, sorry. It's a passion of mine, obviously, and it's a passion for all of us, so I'll just finish with one thing. This is going to be a choice for Australians to make and a choice for young Australians to make. The choice for a strong economy and a stronger future, the only choice is Liberal.
Ali, what's the Labor Party doing for young people?
Yeah, I think Clark rightly pointed out, it is a choice between a government and the alternative, and that's an Anthony Albanese Labor government. And I think young people know Scott Morrison, know the government, and will overwhelmingly reject it. And as Clark correctly pointed out, we have had economic growth, but what we have had is an increase profit shares part of the economy. We have wages stagnant for the past decade, and particularly on minimum wage workers, which young people overwhelmingly are reliant on the minimum wage and entitlements. And what we've seen in the past few weeks is Scott Morrison and the Liberal government go on the attack against Labor and Anthony Albanese for daring to back a pay rise for young people, a pay rise for minimum wage workers that keeps up with the cost of living, so 5.1%. So that's not even a real wage increase. That just means people can afford the bills, people can afford groceries, people can afford increased rents and their mortgages. And the Liberal government's rejected that. I think in terms of working for young people, it starts with boosting wages and particularly for minimum wage workers, and that's something the Labor Party is committed to. It means dealing with the cost of living crisis. It means dealing with housing affordability and rental affordability. And I think this is why young people will vote for Labor or will vote against the government, because they are struggling. While we have economic growth, it's certainly not growth for everyone.
So we've heard cost of living, we've heard wages, we've heard economy. Ethan, if I can throw to you quickly, what is the Greens Party doing for young people?
So I guess to look at it in terms of representation, there are 6 MPs out of 227 that are younger than 35 in our parliament. And what's happened is that we are so incredibly underrepresented that the issues that are important to us just aren't being heard and we're being ignored. So our plan for this election, first of all, we want to lower the voting age to 16. We want to expand the amount of people that can actually vote, because you've seen with the school strike for climate movement, young people are engaged. I'd go so far to say that young people are more engaged than the older generation. They see what's coming in their future, and they're doing as much as they possibly can to avoid it. So we start with lowering the voting age, and then we actually tackle the issues that are causing this cost of living crisis. So we'll abolish student debt, we'll make university and TAFE free, we'll include mental and dental under Medicare, and we'll make sure that we have real climate action, because what the Liberal and Labor parties aren't telling you is that they're going to support more coal and gas projects, 114 new coal and gas projects. They're going to make sure that billionaires like Gina Rinehart and Clive Palmer can get away with tax cuts while the rest of us are struggling to put food on the table, keep a roof over our heads, and make sure that we can actually live a good life. So the Greens are offering a party that is willing to listen to the people rather than to the big dirty donors and the billionaires that fund both of the major parties.
Well, we've had a lot of things covered in those few minutes, but I'm going to throw back to our fantastic youth panel here who have lined up some excellent questions that many of you also submitted through the Body Shop's Instagram. First off, we're going to kick off with Anjali to start off.
Hi. So I'd just also like to quickly acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to any Indigenous people present in this room. My first question for Clark and Ali is that polls such as the ABC's Vote Compass have shown that strong action on climate change is the first priority that people are taking to the polling booths. And yet, both of your parties are backing 114 new coal and gas projects. How can you put forward policies that are clearly so out of touch with what voters want?
Clark, we'll start with you.
Thank you for that question. Climate change is a massive issue. It's an exceptionally serious issue, and Australia is leading the way when it comes to action on climate change. As you know, I'm sure you do know, that this government has enacted, for the first time in our history, a plan to get to net zero emissions by 2050. The previous Labor Greens government didn't do that. We've done it. We signed the Paris Climate Accord. We're going to meet and exceed our targets. By 2030, we'll have about 30 to 35% emissions reduction off our 2005 baseload. But there's more to do. There always is more to do. And as we make the transition towards a renewable energy future, we've got to have that strong economy to fund it. That's the only way that we're going to get there.
Ali, I saw you shaking your head. What's your response?
Yeah, I'm proud to be from South Australia, where the Labor Party has led the way in Australia and globally on transitioning towards renewable energy. We went from our electricity grid being at 1% renewables to 60% in the span of 15 years, due to be powered by 100% renewables by 2030, 500% by 2050. I think that just demonstrates what transformative Labor governments can achieve. I think what we've had in this country is decades of conservative Liberal rule, where the Liberals have had to be dragged kicking and screaming every single step for real action on climate change. I mean, John Howard, who was Prime Minister for a very long time, is effectively a climate change denier. I mean, I don't even want to get started on Tony Abbott, but I think it's clear that the Liberals had to be dragged towards action on climate change. And it's not enough. I mean, the Labor Party's committed to a 42% reduction in comparison by 2030 in emissions, and obviously net zero by 2050 as well. But to answer the question, look, I think what we need is a transition towards renewables. I think a lot of people do care about climate change. I think the best way to put it at the top of the agenda is for more people to get involved in political spaces, join a party, and make their voice heard this election. And I think the reality is those that are currently in power and those that have power and are influencing society do have corporate interests that mean essentially not acting on climate change, because that costs them money. And I think we have a real plan, and we've always had a plan on tackling climate change.
All right, we'll stop there. Anjali, you had a second question.
Yeah, but just something on what you said, Clark, about, you had a lot of talking points about how the Liberal Party has reduced its emissions and how it's on track to meet and beat its targets. Isn't it true, though, that a lot of the Liberal Party's emissions reductions targets that they've achieved in Parliament have been achieved as a result of land clearing, which isn't a deliberate measure to reduce emissions. And when you take out land clearing, our emissions have actually risen. And you say, a strong economy, technology, not taxes, but so much of that technology doesn't exist right now. And isn't it true that fossil fuel companies such as Santos and Woodside barely pay any tax? Like, how can you reconcile that with the fact that you're delaying action on climate change for measures such as this?
Did you want to respond to that quickly,
Yeah,
Clark?
absolutely, happy to. I just want to firstly touch on a point that Ali made just in relation to state governments. There's in fact only one government in this country which has the best record on the environment and the best record on a carbon neutral state, and that's the state of Tasmania. It's been a Liberal state there for 9 years now, and they've been carbon neutral. In fact, they're carbon negative for the last 5 years. And that's through that government's investment in renewable energy, in technology, and as you've said there, technology, not taxes. And we've seen that transformation there. Now, that's something I'd love to see across Australia, not just in that state.
Anjali.
My next question is for Ethan and Clark. Do you believe that the government has a duty of care to protect young people from the impacts of climate change?
Ethan, start with you.
Yes, I do. I believe it's appalling that Susan Lee would spend taxpayer money to argue in court the opposite. And I think that the court case that was brought on by young climate activists was an incredible insight into the power and into the vulnerability that young people see about their future, and they're fighting for it. And to quickly touch on the first question, you had both of the fellow panelists talking about the economy and a transition to renewables, but not actually answering the question about why both of their governments support 114 new coal and gas projects. We are in a climate emergency, and the rest of the world is telling us, they're imploring us, that we cannot open any new fossil fuel infrastructure if we want to stay within 1.5 degrees of warming. 26 to 28%, which is the Liberals' target, will put us at 3 degrees of warming, almost up to 4 degrees. The Labor's 43% target will put us at over 2 degrees, which will completely kill the Great Barrier Reef and will fail to meet our agreements under the Paris Agreement. So if you want real action on climate and you want it now, the only option is to vote Greens. Our 75% target will keep us within 1.5 degrees and we'll get to net zero by 2035 with 100% renewable energy by 2030.
And Clark, your response?
I think we've all got a duty of care when it comes to the environment. Everyone has a duty of care in everything we do every day. The products we buy, for example, the energy we use, the mode of transport we get to work. We all have that duty of care. And it's important for all of us to take that personal responsibility when it comes to caring for our environment.
Isn't it on a larger scale, though, when you think about approving fossil fuel projects to, walking to work instead of taking a car?
But we all make our own personal choice about the energy we use. For example, if you don't want to use fossil fuels in your house, you don't have to. You can use renewable energy right now if you want to use carbon-free energy.
Could I just quickly respond to that?
Sure.
I'm sorry, but does personal responsibility have as much of an impact as 114 new coal and gas projects? I mean, it is deeply, it's not possible for you to compare the two in terms of damage it's going to do to the planet. So if you want action on climate, sure, personal responsibility has a role to play, but it doesn't make any difference if we're still opening new coal and gas projects, if we're still fueling the climate crisis with taxpayer money. It doesn't matter. So we've got to have both, but we can't have just personal responsibility and let billionaires keep destroying our planet.
All right, well, we probably should throw to the very last question you have, Anjali.
Yep, last question for Ali and Ethan. What is the best way to tackle climate change right now?
Ali, we'll start with you.
Yeah. Look, it sounds cheeky, but I think it's, in terms of Australia, it's voting the Scott Morrison government out and voting an alternative in through the Labor Party. I think it's quite clear that we have a plan, and sure, it may leave things to be desired, but I think it's quite clear, and you can look at the previous Rudd and Gillard governments and their actions on climate change, both in Australia and globally, and just see the contrast. But it starts, I mean, so in terms of Labor's plan, it starts through massively increasing renewable energy production and rewiring the grid to facilitate that. It starts with disincentivizing the emissions and incentivizing the use of clean energy. And it starts by having real concrete targets as to where we want to get to and having measures to actually allow us to get there. And I think it's in the social fabric of, speaking of duty of care earlier, of the party to leave a better future for the next generations. And that obviously starts with tackling climate change, not just in Australia, but globally as well. I mean, Australia's not taken seriously by Pacific Island friends or more internationally. And I think we need to rebuild that trust and have, climate change doesn't end with Australia doing things. We need collective global action.
And Ethan, really quickly, how do we
yes.
best tackle climate change?
So it needs a very strong crossbench. So if you look at the Gillard government, it was a Greens, Independent and Labor government that passed the most progressive climate action we've ever seen in this country. So if you want real action on climate, you have to vote Green or you have to vote Independent, because unfortunately both major parties take donations from the fossil fuel industry. If you look at the Minerals Council of New South Wales, they donate to both major parties, so that no matter who forms government, their interests will always trump those of us and of young people. So the best thing we can do right now for climate action is to vote Green in the lower house and in the Senate.
All right, thank you to you both. So now we're going to move on to racial injustice. Latoya and Nicola will be asking the first questions.
Yamagara, my name is Nicola Barker. I'm a proud Mulwari Wangamara woman from far west New South Wales, Brewarrina and Burke. I stand here on Gadigal country and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders, both past and present and emerging, as a visitor on Eora Nation. My first question is for Ethan and Clark. What does racial injustice mean to you?
Clark, we'll start with you.
Thank you for that question. It's such an important issue, and I think it's an issue I hope that there is bipartisan nature on, because it's something that can't be solved overnight. It's something that we have done a lot of work on, both all governments, and it's something that we need to continue to work on. The Liberal Party's got a very proud tradition in relation to Indigenous people. We have, of course, Neville Bonner, the first Indigenous person, the first person in Australia's history who was able to share their lived experience in our national institution. We've done a lot of good things as far as closing the gap in relation to education, but there have been steps and misses, and there have been areas which we haven't done so well in, including incarceration of Indigenous people. If you're white in this country, you're less likely to be in jail than if you are not. That's unacceptable. That's wrong, and it's something that we need to work on.
Ethan, what does racial injustice mean to you?
To me, to answer the question, I'd say it's overarching societal structures that reinforce this culture of racism that we have in this country. And what the Greens want to do is basically, we want to tackle the issue at its core. So that means investing money into making sure that we've got an anti-racism strategy nationally. We want to make sure that hate speech and hate symbols are completely illegal, and we've seen that Victoria has started making those moves when it comes to the swastika. And of course that means incorporating all aspects of the statement from the heart, because we can't have real action on tackling racism until we actually attack it at its core, which is what the Greens really want us to do this election.
All right, and the next question.
My name is Latoya. Sorry. I'm standing on Gadigal land, and to be honest, it's hard to tackle conversations on the future when I fear a lot of my people won't be here to see it with you all. In the past 5 years, I've had 2 family members die in prison in Australia. My brother's death, involving 14 prison officers and a spit hood, resulted in the successful campaign to ban spit hoods in South Australia, the first place to do so in the world. Torture devices like spit hoods remain approved for use in mental health facilities, immigration detention, police and prisons across Australia. Spit hoods continue to be used upon children in Australia as young as 12 years old, which is the age of criminal responsibility at current. People are still dying because of these devices, with even the inquest into the death in custody of an Aboriginal woman occurring this year in Queensland. With continued human rights abuses in Australia, with Australia's failure to meet its anti-torture OPCAT obligations, the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture, monitoring how people are treated in prisons and places of detention, and with the Australian Human Rights Commission having its National Human Rights A status deferred, it's clear we need new commitments to justice. What can be done to stop the ongoing killings of people, of my family members, especially in police custody and in prisons?
Thanks, Latoya. Ethan, we'll start with you there.
So to tackle it straight away, what the Greens want to do is we want to increase the age of criminal responsibility to 14. It's disgusting, honestly, that we're having 10-year-old First Nations children being locked up, kept away from their families, and it just sort of reinforces the idea that, First Nations people are stuck in this sort of cycle. They're stuck in the justice system, and they are disproportionately incarcerated compared to their white Caucasian counterparts. So that's what we want to do. And we also want to make sure that we actually address these issues. So that means royal commissions actually need to be enacted. The suggestions of royal commissions need to be enacted, not just done to make it look like they're actually doing action on it. We need real action, and that can only happen with the Greens and the balance of power, because our main policy and our main values are empathy and compassion, and we care about fairness. And that's just not what we're seeing right now with the criminal justice system.
Clark.
Look, firstly, I'm so sorry about what happened to your brother. That's awful, and I just can't imagine. I don't pretend to know what that would be like. I'm obviously a white man. I don't have that lived experience that you do, and that's just horrible to hear what's happened to you and your family. So again, I'm so sorry for that. I think as a country we have just so much to do in relation to this issue. I mean, the Uluru Statement from the Heart really laid out a strong foundation for what we need to do in this area. We need to have truth, we need to have a voice, and yes, we do need to have a treaty eventually, absolutely. There's just, so much to do in relation to this. It starts with getting more Indigenous people involved in politics, absolutely it does. Making sure that those voices are heard, that those truths are told, and that Australians as a nation can move forward together and not leave, our First Nations people behind.
All right, before we go into the final question by Nicola, Latoya, did you have any response that you wanted to say to that?
Yeah, I guess just along the way, the Uluru Statement, while excellent in its entirety and formed by many Aboriginal people, of course, is about a voice to Parliament. But being a Māori person as well, there are seats in Māori Parliament specifically for Māori people in New Zealand, and that's something that I'd love to see in terms of representation, even here today with 3 men on the panel, as you each pointed out this morning. So we've got a long way to go, but I am hopeful.
Thank you. All right, Nicola, final question from you.
Thank you. So I am a co-founder and director of the National Indigenous Youth Education Coalition. We have been fighting, pushing and challenging the Australian government, states and federal levels to change the educational system through our Learn Our Truth campaign. To ensure our communities have access to education that reflects us and includes us. Education has historically been used as a tool to assimilate our people, erase our own history, culture and language. This colonial legacy still impacts us. An equitable education ecosystem relies on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander thoughtful leadership and self-determination. 60% of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are under the age of 35, meaning many of our mob are still at school or have recently left the schooling system. Australia has the 4th most socially segregated school system in the OECD, disproportionately impacting Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander learners. How does your party plan on supporting sovereignty and culturally safe schooling that ensures students are able and empowered to self-determinate their own education?
Ali, we'll start with you.
Thank you for the question. Look, going back to a few things as well, I think answer to that is, firstly, it starts with acknowledging that We live in a colonial country, that was built on the basis of colonialism and genocide, and remain one of the very few countries without a treaty with Indigenous, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And I think it starts with acknowledging that and supporting voice, treaty, truth, and through that process, and particularly via treaty and various state and federal government negotiations with Aboriginal peoples, that there is empowerment, there is resources, and Aboriginal people have a bigger control and say over their lives, including schooling and education. I think the key to reconciliation, closing the gap, is through voice, treaty, truth. So I think that's key, empowering Aboriginal people, ensuring they have a say over all aspects of their life, including education and the continuation of their respective languages.
Clark.
Thank you for the question. I think it touches on something that's really important that we always need to remember, that truth-telling isn't a once-off. It's not something that we've done that tick. It's something that needs to continually happen, and it needs to happen in our education system and throughout our education system. We need to learn our history, and that includes, of course, our First Nations history. If we don't know our history, we're destined to repeat it. So that's why it's so important.
It's funny, as I'm listening, I'm thinking about how we're having this conversation about truth-telling, and this isn't really happening on the national debate right now, so it's great that we're getting to talk about these issues. Now going to be asking about affordable housing. I'll throw to Ashley, who will be asking the question.
Yeah, hi everyone, good morning. And I too would like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we're all gathering here today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge my very wonderful panellists here as well. Housing is a conversation that I have on the daily with my partner, with our friends, with our peers, and it's the centre of most of the decisions I make in my life at the moment, is around how I can structure my career and my finances to maybe one day have the opportunity to maybe own my own home. So my first question is to Clark and Ethan. What does affordable housing look like to you?
Ethan, we'll start with you.
So to me, affordable housing looks like publicly owned, high quality and accessible homes. So our policy for this election is to build 1 million of those homes. Across the country, over the next 20 years, we'll create tens of thousands of jobs, and we'll make sure that we're slashing public housing waiting lists, we end homelessness, and we make sure that there are homes available for essential workers who have supported us through the pandemic, so nurses, teachers, and public servants. Because what we're seeing, especially on the Northern Beaches, where I'm standing as a candidate, we've got teachers and nurses who are commuting a really long commute to be able to work in the community, but they just can't afford to live there. So we want to build those homes, and we want to make sure that people have a place to call home. Because what we've got now is housing being seen as an investment opportunity rather than a basic human right. So that's what the Greens are really trying to tackle. And I'm sure that the Liberals will want to talk about a 40% superannuation contribution, when in reality it's just an upwards transfer of wealth from the youth to the older Australians who already have their foot in the door when it comes to the housing market. But what we need is actually affordable and accessible homes.
Well, we've seen a lot of discussion about that superannuation point, Clark. Anybody who has a Twitter account or Instagram has probably seen it. So
Good.
What do you have to say to that
Excellent.
question?
I'm glad our message is getting out there. Look, on that policy, which has obviously just been announced on Sunday, the basis of this policy is just letting people access their own funds if they want to. Superannuation is money that we've all earned ourselves. It's money that we got at my first job at Macca's, and I'm getting at my current job today. It's money that we should all be able to have access to, in part to buy the biggest investment that many of us will make, which is our first home. To go back to the question about what affordable housing looks like, I'm in a very similar situation as someone looking to buy my first home, and I'm very frustrated by the market as it currently is. Houses are incredibly expensive, absolutely. We need to build a lot more of them, absolutely, both public housing but also private. We can't ignore the fact that most houses built in this country are built by developers, and that's not only a local issue, it's a state issue, but also a federal issue as well. What the federal government's done in the last 2 years is actually develop the First Home Guarantee Scheme. Now that's helped 60,000 young Australians access a home with a deposit as little as 5%. So that's a fantastic scheme which is actually genuinely helping people get into the housing market.
Ashley, before you go to the second question, did you have any response to what the panellists said?
Look, thank you for your responses. I hope to be able to retire one day and own my own home, but I also acknowledge that for myself and for many other young Australians, we can't do it without the help of our parents. This is a structural issue as well, which actually leads in beautifully to my second question, to Ali and Clark. Why do you think negative gearing and capital gains tax is being supported when the housing crisis is so rampant?
Ali?
It's clear that the Labor Party took to the last election plans to scrap negative gearing and then later changed to, it was going to be grandfathered, but and reform capital gains tax. And we lost that election. From then, a lot of our policies were effectively reset. Of course, I personally support scrapping negative gearing and major reforms to capital gains tax across the board, not just on housing. But even if you were to completely get rid of negative gearing tomorrow, house prices will continue to increase. That's the brutal reality. What we've seen is massive increases in house prices and rents as well. And I think it's broader structural issues, but the reality is, at the moment, not everyone is going to be able to get 341 square meters of land to build their own home on, and that's due to various reasons. And in terms of what in terms of what affordable housing looks to me, it's stronger and better tenancy rights and protections. We have among the worst tenancy rights and protections in the world, with generally rolling 1-year leases. It's increasing Commonwealth rental assistance. It's building public housing, and there's certainly a lot to be desired from both the Labor and Liberal parties on housing, because it is quite a tough issue. And the reason it is because a lot of people are gaining from the increase in house prices, and that's those that currently own a home. So there's a bit of a massive intergenerational issue.
All right, we'll have to stop there just because of time, but Clark, your response.
Look, I'm glad to hear that you guys have gotten rid of that retiree tax. That's fantastic, but disappointed you still support it. Look, I don't think the solution to our housing problem is taking money away from retirees, which is the proposal of the former Labor government, former Labor leader, sorry. I think there's a whole range of policies that we can enact which won't hurt other people, but will in fact help people get access to their first home. And as I said, it's a supply issue. We need to build more houses.
Ashley, your final question.
Yes. So look, housing is a real intergenerational issue. So moving away from that a little bit to something that is impacting everybody at the moment, what do you think can be done to reduce the cost of living? And this question is for Ethan and Ali.
Ethan, I'll start with you.
So to reduce the cost of living, what we want to see is the actual things that young people desperately need, either completely free or actually accessible for young people. So that means, like I said before, free and accessible childcare, free university and free TAFE. We want to abolish student debt so that young people don't have to go into the workforce with this massive burden and then also be expected to buy their first home. We want to increase the pension, and we want to increase the minimum wage. I think what we want to see is $23.76 as a minimum wage, and we want free dental and free mental health under Medicare, and we want to raise all income support, so job seeker, etc., to at least $88 a day, which is above the poverty line.
Ali?
Yeah, so I think it starts with increasing wages, which I touched on earlier. So as part of my job, I negotiate collective contracts. And almost every single time, the employers are saying, no, workers don't need this, and not just on minimum wage jobs. Despite having a huge surge in profits. Profits have gone up during COVID. And I think workers deserve a bigger share of that. And we need to increase wages to, at the very least, the inflation, so above 5.1%. Really, you need 10% wage increases to, have a real increase compared to a decade ago. But that aside, so increase wages. It's on increasing Commonwealth rent assistance and other rent support to assist struggling people. It's fixing Medicare and aged care. I mean, the gaps people are having to pay are ever increasing. There's fewer essential things people need that are listed on Medicare. And health costs are a huge cost to people. So are aged care costs, and we're getting awful outcomes for the money we're putting in there. And they're all things that the Labor Party is committed to. Then finally, we've committed to effectively a universal free childcare system that will make childcare cheaper or free for 97% of families. And what we know is a lot of young families have to pay very high childcare costs, sometimes to the point where it doesn't make sense for someone, often the woman in the relationship, to work because the amount they're paying to childcare. I think reforming childcare will play a big part in reducing cost of living.
Thanks, Ali. So now we're going to be having a discussion about mental health, which many young people watching in today said that was a top priority issue. Jalika, you'll be asking the first question.
I think, actually, firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land from which we are all gathering, and also the lands from which people are watching this debate at the moment, and pay my respects to elders past and present. And I think that's really important to ground any conversations around mental health in this country in. So the first question I would like to ask is actually a really personal one that's come through from a young person. And they've said, I haven't been able to afford seeing a psychiatrist beyond 2 sessions, even though I have a mental health problem that restricts my daily life. This question goes to Ali and Clark. Do you think that this should be covered by Medicare?
Clark, I'll start with you.
Thank you for that question. Firstly, that's not right. Every Australian under Medicare is entitled to 20 free sessions with their GP or psychiatrist or psychologist or counsellor or whatever they need access to. That's doubled since the last Labor Greens government. We doubled it during COVID, and in the last budget we made it permanent. So I'm happy to touch base with that person if we've got their details and get them in touch with one of our MPs to help them out get access through Medicare, because those services are available to everyone.
Ali, your response?
Yeah. Look, if there's anything I'll commend Scott Morrison on is we have seen increased investment in mental health, and it's obviously supported by myself and the party generally. And what we've also seen, unfortunately, is a health crisis, worsened by a mental health crisis that's come out on the back of COVID and a range of other things. It's not just mental health care people can't need, but it's a range of other essential things. People are having to wait hours in emergency rooms. People are being ramped. Ambulance ramping is through the roof across the country. And I think what we need in mental health and the healthcare system is a massive injection of funding. We're seeing a massive commodities boom with Australia's GDP increasing, profits are increasing. And that needs to be directed to fixing the healthcare system, including building an affordable, high-quality mental health system.
Angelica, your second question.
Yes, I actually would like to say something in relation to that response. I think I think the heart of the question goes back to the young person saying that they couldn't afford their session.
Yeah.
And when we think about the mental health system, it doesn't operate in a silo. It's a system that interacts with, a young person's ability to access employment, where they're currently living. There's so many intersectional factors that impact mental health, and investing in all aspects of a young person is, I think, what the heart of the question really is touching on. And that actually lends a hand into my second question. We know that young people in Australia are experiencing higher rates of mental ill health as a result of marginalisation by society. So that could be in employment, that could be in experiences that happen maybe based off your gender. And so how do you think that we can best ensure mental health supports are tailored to be accessible to the varying intersectional needs of young people in Australia, but also how are we going to encourage young people to be co-designers and agents of change to make policies around making accessible mental health supports come to life?
Ethan, your response?
Just to quickly touch on the first question, what we want to see is unlimited sessions with mental health professionals, because obviously once you reach your limit, your mental health doesn't just stop. Obviously it's an ongoing thing, and what we also want to do is tackle the core issues. So we've got a climate crisis, a housing crisis, we've got a cost of living crisis, and all of these things are weighing so heavily on young people. It's no wonder that we're seeing these mental health rates skyrocket. So the Greens are going to address those. And to answer the second question, we want to invest billions of dollars into a fund where young people are actually able to tailor their own mental health solutions and their own mental health policies and plans. And we're basically just going to make sure that that's enshrined in legislation. And like I said, we just want ongoing support for young people. We want to tackle the issues that are causing it, and we want to have ongoing support with those issues. But it starts with stopping it, so preventative mental health care.
And Clark, your response to co-design and the intersectional dimensions of mental health?
Yeah, no, it's really important because not everyone is the same. Everyone is different, and of course there are so many factors at play. As you mentioned, some of them, age, obviously, for young people, their gender, where they live, if they're queer, if they're Indigenous. There are just so many different factors which have to come into effect when assessing and looking at mental health. We invented Headspace as a Liberal government, and we have funded that enormously, and I'm happy to say that that was the one thing that Anthony Albanese praised our government for. It's something that is really important to the Prime Minister. It's something that's important to me as a young person. And it's great to see that there has been such a strong investment, not only in services like Headspace, but also in those services that have direct interaction with people from different communities. So whether it's Indigenous support, mental health support services, or services that affect LGBT young people, those services are receiving huge amounts of funding right now from the federal government, because we know that young people are doing it very tough right now, and that mental health is an important issue that hasn't been addressed, and we weren't even speaking about it 20 years ago, and now it's something that is an important issue for all.
Can I just make a small comment?
Yeah, sure.
So just on the co-design, something that Labor's committed to, which we previously had as well, is introducing a Minister for Youth and a Youth Advisory Council that will advise a Labor government on all aspects of policy impacting young people. One of the key things, of course, is mental health and broader healthcare. But I think what we are lacking at the moment is youth voices. And, they don't just have to be, in Parliament. Democracy doesn't start or end, in the chambers of Parliament, but it starts with engaging with society and youth voices and consulting them in all policies that impact them.
Thanks, Ali. And your final question, Angelica.
Yeah, sure thing. As I look at this question, actually, I just reflect on the fact that, school has a massive impact on all of us, and I'm having flashbacks to the many positive and negative times in school that I had, and even in school that I'm doing right now in uni. But also reflecting on, in my own family context, my mum is a teacher, and I see the load that teachers have in not just their work, but also supporting supporting staff. So this question really touches on all aspects of that. So how do you think we can improve mental health support in schools specifically? Because this is where many young people are experiencing challenging times, but teachers can only do so much.
Ali, we'll start with you.
So I'm incredibly proud that just elected as South Australian Labor government, one of the key things South Australian Labor got to play a part on, took to the election was improving our education system in all aspects. And one of the key things we took was exactly as you're suggesting. We've hired psychiatrists, a range of specialists in a whole areas impacting particularly younger children, whether it be speech pathologists, but we have experts in all areas across schools will do shortly in South Australia now, and that will play a huge role in improving educational and health outcomes for young people. They'll be getting support where they need it in schools, and that's what a transformative Labor government can and will achieve. I think that's a model for the rest of the country.
Ethan, mental health support in schools, what are the Greens pledging to do?
So basically it comes back to making sure that mental health is actually fully funded under Medicare, and at a state level, which is where mental health support in schools really comes in. The Greens are really strongly advocating for more professionals. We need a better system and a better interaction between mental health and teachers and students. Because, you look at the issues that students are facing in schools, bullying, but then also external factors like the climate crisis. So what we need are really high-trained professionals that can deal with that, and we need to make sure that they're actually supporting students in school. And I went to a Catholic all-boys high school, and it gave me thick skin, but when I needed that support for my mental health, our school counsellor was part-time and they were just fully booked out, a school of 800 students. So we just need a lot more support, and we need it right now. So we desperately need that.
All right, thanks to you both. So now we're moving on to the final segment of this discussion, which is all about domestic violence. Maria, you have the questions, so we'll start with you.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. And I also want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we meet on here today, pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge the First Nations people who are here today and those who are tuning in. And I think that's really important because this next issue that we're going to talk about, it does affect certain communities disproportionately. And we know that when it comes to domestic violence, First Nations women are more likely to be hospitalised, they're more likely to die from assault, and like First Nations women, there are people with disabilities, people from the queer community, from lower socioeconomic areas. So with this in mind, and knowing that this issue does affect certain communities disproportionately, Ethan, first question for you. Why do you believe domestic violence is such an issue in Australia?
Yeah.
So I think at its core, I love talking about the core issues of these issues. Basically, we need better education within schools, so it sort of just stamps out this behaviour before it becomes widespread. But when it comes to preventing it, over the next 12 years, the Greens will invest $12 billion into a national plan for ending violence against women, and we'll also have a standalone plan for First Nations women, because like you said, it disproportionately affects people in these vulnerable communities, and the Greens recognise that, and we appreciate that. So that's why we need this really strong and this really well-funded plan that can actually address this issue, because it's not going to happen with thoughts and prayers. You see the statistics. Every week it's this horrible news that comes out about domestic violence, and we just really need to tackle the issue as quickly as we can before more lives are lost.
And Clark, why do you believe domestic violence is such an issue?
Because it's so rampant. This is a problem, and it's a top priority for the government to address. For the first time ever, we've got a national plan for ending domestic violence and violence against children. The Prime Minister said at the National Women's Summit last year that it was a national shame, statistics on violence against women, and he's right. We've got a plan now. That plan will hopefully help address some of these concerns, but it's going to be a continual path, and hopefully a bipartisan one, that we go down to stop domestic violence and violence against children.
And Clark, I'll ask a further question. Last year we saw a lot of scrutiny on the government because of actions of federal parliamentarians, indeed alleged, including the story of Brittany Higgins and the former staffer as well. Do you have any response to, I guess, the concerns of women heading into this election in regards to what happened last year?
Look, our parliament needs to be a place of respect, and the actions of parliamentarians and what has happened or what is alleged to have happened in parliament, it's revolting, it's disgusting, it's unprofessional. The government took action on it. The government has taken action on it and continues to do so. The Human Rights Commission undertook a review and looked at the behaviours of Parliament. There has been action taken, there still is more to be done.
And then second question from you, Maria.
Thank you both for that response. And I think before I go on to the next question, because it relates, the current government has been criticised for at times lacking empathy and lacking urgency and adequate action, to create tangible strategies and plans. And what's interesting is that, we talk about the current government taking action, but actually not only have they been slow to act, but they've often not represented the communities that are actually most affected. And not only are they not represented, they tend to be ignored and marginalised further. So with that in mind, and knowing that the people who are most affected don't have a seat at the table, what would you do to help eliminate domestic violence? And I'm going to throw this one to Ali first.
Thank you. And thank you for the previous question as well. Look, from unfortunately seeing domestic violence firsthand, I can tell you the system sucks. Often, obviously, overwhelmingly women, because it's a gendered issue, tend to stay in abusive relationships for very rational reasons. And in my case, it's because if you have children with someone, it's really, really tough. And what I saw was, you have a custody arrangement, and if you escape, you're in breach of the custody arrangement, and you're the criminal for trying to get away from it. And the only way to get rid of that would be to get a court intervention, which is very difficult if you lack a car and the financial means to do so. It's if you call the police, they hate dealing with it, and they frankly don't really care. It's that if you go to another state and speak to domestic violence shelter there, they tell you they can't do anything because it's a different jurisdiction. It's that you are being financially controlled and lack the resources to actually be able to escape that relationship, because you're dependent on your partner to live, and good luck getting a accommodation at the moment. As there's no landlord's going to give accommodation to particularly a single parent without an income or rental history. There's a whole range of issues, and I don't think we're doing a good job at dealing with them. And in terms of eliminating and combating domestic violence, it obviously starts with ensuring there is a safety net. That means everyone can be supported. It means that we reverse what the Liberals did, and that's abolishing the family federal court jurisdiction, which is something One Nation's been campaigning and successfully got, and having a good judicial system that's able to cater to people in these situations. And it's through having emergency and affordable housing that people can go to and not just simply stay in a shelter, which is not particularly accommodating. And that's something Labor has committed to: 30,000 affordable homes and social housing, 10,000 of which will be specifically targeted at women escaping domestic violence.
Thanks, Ali, and thanks for sharing your experience as well. Clark.
Look, I think Ali touched on it a little bit there, and I just want to say, I think the root of the issue is obviously around respect. There's poor respect amongst people towards women in some regards, and that's where that all begins. I think we need to have more women in the conversation. I'm sort of looking at, obviously we mentioned it before, there's 3 blokes up here. We need to have more women engaged in politics in this country. We need more women in Parliament. People will then, I think that is genuinely the answer, because those women have to be in the conversation for change to happen. That has to be part of it.
And would you be in favour of quotas to get more women
Look,
into Parliament?
I think when it comes to whom is elected to Parliament, it's got to be up to the people to decide. People need to make the decision over who is the most qualified person in the seat, not over what their gender might be or what their sexuality might be or what race they are. I think we need to do more, I'm talking about my party, in relation to encouraging women in Parliament. We've taken steps, we are not where we need to be, and we'll move there, but it's unfortunately slow going. More needs to be done.
Okay.
Can I quickly add to that?
Sure.
So I'm incredibly proud to be a part of a party where 60% of our MPs are women and 30% of our MPs are women of colour. And when it comes to the financial difficulties that women fleeing violence face, what we want to see is 10 days of paid domestic violence leave, and we want to see survivor grants of $10,000 so that you can escape your abusive relationship and you can set up a new life without the fear of having to return to that abusive partner. Because if you look at the statistics, it is absolutely confronting the number of women who are forced to go back into that abusive relationship, and of course that just gets worse and worse, so we need to address that.
All right, thank you. And Maria, your final question.
Thank you. And I think it's just important to say, firstly, thank you, Ali, for sharing your experience. And to the point, I think it goes deeper than respect, Clark. And when you're looking at the current government, we're talking about quotas. I think, unfortunately, what we have seen is a lot of wishy-washy talk around respect and supporting women and empowering vulnerable communities, but there is not enough tangible action. So things like quotas, I don't think the world we live in is such where people get things on merit, because if we did, we would see more women, First Nations people with disabilities and LGBTQIA plus people in positions of leadership, and therefore you would see their voices reflected in the strategies and action plans put forward for the issues affecting them most. So I think it goes deeper than that, and it must be said because this matters to us. And so for my final question, whilst I wish, there was more we could do and more we invested in early intervention and education, I'm going to shift the focus now to what can we do to those who are victims of this issue. 42% of those presenting to domestic violence services in 2020 to 2021, they had experienced family and domestic violence. So I know you touched on it a little bit, Ethan, but can you elaborate on what can be done for those who are currently escaping violence situations? What can we do to ensure that they have a safe place to live?
So to answer your question, which is absolutely fantastic, thank you, we need to see more women's resilience centres set up so that you can actually escape that relationship with your family. If you've got a pet, you can bring them too, because what we're seeing are women being turned away at the door because, you don't really have these, weeks in advance to plan your departure. It's often the night of that you flee with your family and you just can't find a bed and you can't find a safe place to keep your family. So we need more resilience centres, we need more beds for women and their children escaping violence. And like I said, we need financial compensation. So $10,000 grants, 10 days paid domestic violence leave, and of course addressing the issue at its core.
And Clark, your answer to the final question.
Look, just on Ethan's point, just in relation to the domestic violence leave, I think only yesterday the Fair Work Commission announced that is now law. So that's fantastic to see, and I think that's a really important acknowledgement that, these are extraordinary circumstances which largely women face, and they need the resources to be able to live their lives. This issue, unfortunately, is one which is, incredibly difficult to deal with for many people. It's something that I hope we can continue to work on in a bipartisan nature, because it is something that shouldn't be political. It should be something that we all come together on, and I do hope that is the solution.
All right, thank you so much to you all. So today, The Body Shop's Great Youth Debate has given us a glimpse into the future of Australian politics and shown us the power of elevating youth voices in public life. I really think today demonstrates that power. We hope this has inspired you on your own activist journey. To find out more about making your voice heard, visit the Activism Hub on the Body Shop website, and to help nurture the next generation of young leaders, the Body Shop's Changemaker kits are now available to purchase online and in-store, with $10 from every sale going to the Foundation for Young Australians Collective Imagining program. So on that, I'd like to thank our incredible panel and activists, and thank you all for joining this discussion today. Thank you.
We've always had something to say.
Stood up, raised our voice,
Shone a light.
spoken truth to power.
Born to fight. Because we are the dreamers.
Believers.
The rebels.
We are the ones that can make a difference. So tomorrow,
Like yesterday.
and like today, be seen, be heard, and let's make real change.